Contemporary Jewish author Noah Ben Shea offers the following reflection on life. He writes, "Life is best understood as a tapestry, which means that by its very nature we are working on it from the back, in a blind, as they say. The Sabbath is when we are allowed to turn the tapestry over so that we can see the larger pattern. The Sabbath, a day on which we are invited to turn the tapestry of life over and see the larger pattern, to stop and to get our bearings, be restored, renewed, refocused for living." This is something of what I'd like to talk about this morning. Today we continue our study of the Ten Commandments with number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And on the surface it seems like the most simple of the 10, almost kind of weak compared to the more pressing issues of the others. Almost seems like God just sort of wanted 10, so he tossed in this kind of weenie commandment to sort of round things out. You know, take a day off, right? It would seem to be the most easily kept of all the commandments and the one we would most want to keep. I mean, who is going to argue with taking some time off? Well, ironically, just about everybody. Throughout history, this has actually been one of the most hotly debated commandments. As you may recall, during Jesus' ministry, it was around this issue of Sabbath observance that Jesus caught the most trouble. Well, in one of Jesus' many debates over this topic, he sought to push his audience to see not just the letter of the law, but its intent. And he said, God made the Sabbath for man, not man for the Sabbath. Notice what he's saying stands at the heart of this commandment. That Sabbath is something God created on our behalf. It's for our good, made for us. A gift given by a loving God to better our lives. So just what is this gift? Well, the word Sabbath is from the verb to cease, and it means basically to stop and to rest. Traditionally, our Jewish brothers and sisters celebrated yesterday from Sunset Friday to Sunset Saturday. But early in Christianity, the first Christians began celebrating the first day of the week, that is the Resurrection Day, as the Sabbath. And eventually Emperor Constantine made Sunday the official day of rest for the empire. And either way, whatever day it is, let's be honest, through all the centuries and changes in timekeeping, nobody really knows what day it is now. Today it could be Tuesday, for all we know, you know. But whatever, God is telling us to stop and to rest one day a week. And if you don't think that this is an important instruction, note that this is the longest of all the commandments. In fact, God devotes more time to this one than the next 6 commandments combined. God is saying that this is serious business. Why? Well, because God knows that rest is central to our well-being, physical, spiritual, emotional. As someone once said, people who cannot find time for rest will be obliged sooner or later to find time for illness. It is central to our well-being. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that throughout history, this commandment has been greatly misunderstood, this misunderstanding leading down 2 opposite yet equally destructive paths. The first path is the strict legalistic reading of the commandment that results in something more burdensome than blessed. For instance, the early Jewish teachers decided that there were 39 different kinds of work and that each kind of work was capable of infinite subdivision. In all this micromanagement, they came up with a list of 1,521 works that could not be done on the Sabbath. For instance, a woman was forbidden to look in the mirror on the Sabbath, lest she see a gray hair and do the work of plucking it out. You could dip a radish in salt on the Sabbath, but if you did so, you had to eat it quickly, because if you didn't, it would begin to pickle, and that would be work. Right? If you thought this was tough, the Essenes, the ultra-conservative sect of Jews who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, taught that one should not even go to the bathroom on the Sabbath, lest you work at it a little too hard. Right? Yeah. And don't think that it stopped there. In the very early days of our own country, devout Christians were no less extreme. In Massachusetts in 1630, a sea captain was put in the stocks for kissing his wife on the Sabbath after he returned from a 3-year voyage. It was a Sabbath offense, and still is on the books, to shave in Connecticut, to take a bath in Boston, or to hum on the streets in Cicero, Illinois on Sunday. The state of Nebraska to this day forbids a husband to quarrel with his wife on Sunday. That last one may be the one we ought to keep, you know? But this is the first way the Sabbath has been really misunderstood and lost. There's rigid legalism that makes a day an oppressive one. And that's wrong. It's not supposed to be a day that we feel confined and guilty, but rather freed and joyful. This need for freedom, however, leads us to the other path of misunderstanding that has left God's gift of Sabbath equally lost. Namely, we just ignore it altogether, right? This, of course, is far more the problem in our modern age, in our 24/7 world, which we pride ourselves in. We don't observe Sabbath at all. As it has been said, our great-grandparents called it the Holy Sabbath. Our grandparents called it the Sabbath. Our parents called it Sunday. We call it the weekend. Special day is now completely lost, each day like any other. And what have we got for this? One of the most stressed out, empty, burned out, exhausted, and lost generations in human history. So how do we recover a true sense of Sabbath and its real gifts? Not so legalistic that it's burdensome, but also not so vague that it's non-existent, Well, I'd like to offer a few suggestions, 4 suggestions for remembering and receiving the gift of the Sabbath. Suggestion number 1, fight for the day. Right off the top, very simply, it's important to remember, putting this in old school terms, we need to remember that the devil doesn't want us to celebrate the Sabbath. He doesn't want us to stop and rest because he knows that as long as he can keep us frantic and running, our lives will be lousy. We'll be irritable and exhausted. Our work and our relationships and our happiness will all suffer. He's going to try anything he can to keep us from stopping, So we need to know that we have to fight for this day or we'll be immediately taken from us. And what this means is that we have to fight to do as little as possible to really make this a day of rest. Yes, believe it or not, goofing off once a week is a sacred calling, Now, this doesn't mean that if you have to go to work on Sunday, or if your child has some sports activity for a season, that you're a bad person. The question is whether or not you're trying to take some time in the day to stop, if absolutely necessary, though not the ideal, faithfully doing no work maybe some other day, or whether you're just making excuses, This is the real question that needs to be asked, is this. Why am I making this decision to do something on this day? For a legitimate reason or for a rationalization? You see, there are 3 main hidden forces we have to confront that tend to keep Sabbath from us. The first is selfishness. We want everything. Often we do things on the Sabbath simply because we don't want to miss out on something, right? Ironically, this constant grasping causing us to lose the greater blessing of just stopping. Much of what we have to have, we could do better without. Sabbath ultimately demands us to own up to our choices, and that's why it's traditionally just so bothersome. The second force is then simple time management. Let's face it, a lot of the things that we do on Sunday, shopping, housework, and so forth, we say that this is the only day we can do these things, but the truth is, most often we could have done these things some other day, but we just didn't want to do them then. We did other things. Remember, God is clear here. 6 days you shall labor, he says. In other words, you have 6 days to get things done. The 4th commandment is not simply about one day, it's about whether or not we are listening to God during the whole week. And the final force then is pride. Basically, we convince ourselves that we must keep busy because, we're so important that the world won't keep spinning without us. I have to do this. How often you hear yourself say this or someone, I have to do this. Really? A corollary to this being the modern plague of the overpacked schedule. People taking the measure of their worth and how busy they are, particularly how they are busier than everyone else. You ever seen people get together and they compare, I've got a more full schedule than you. Well, constant busyness does not necessarily prove worth. More often than not, it simply indicates poor planning, and even more, a lack of faith in God or anybody else. In Sabbath, God is trying to teach us to trust that the world does keep spinning without us, that he has a hold of things, and that we can stop for a day. Do we believe this, or are we faithless? Let me ask you, are you willing to go one day without turning on your computer, without checking your email, one day without turning on your phone and checking your text messages? If not, just how important are you? Essentially, the first basic question of Sabbath observance is this: do I really need to do this today? Is the world going to come to an end if I don't? Does my life truly depend on it? Can this wait? Can I do this another day? And if so, let it go. Stop and trust. Do you remember the story of the Olympian Eric Liddell? It was portrayed in the film Chariots of Fire. In 1924, a young Scotsman named Eric Liddell entered the Olympic Games for Great Britain, and he was favored to win the 100-meter dash. But the race fell on Sunday, and Eric, a devout Christian, refused to run that race. It caused a fury in Great Britain. He was greatly criticized. But the next day, he ran a race that he had never run before, the 200 meters, and he won the gold medal. He rested in Christ and trusted Christ for the results. And God provided for him all that he needed. Are we willing to do the same? Suggestion number 1, fight for the day. Suggestion 2 then, keep it holy. You know, in the text, God tells us that this is a special day, is to be a Sabbath unto the Lord. That is, it's not just a day off. It's a day focused on God. It's a holy day. This is the second point here. Taking the day off is great, but Sabbath is more than that. From its earliest observance, it's been about stopping to take some particular time to focus on God and worship, to get our lives recentered on our Savior, to be truly recharged and redirected. It's a time to gather with the community of faith. It's not just a solo act. Notice how the commandment states that this is for the whole community together. And as God obviously makes it clear here, we need this weekly, however we get it, Not every once in a while, whenever we feel like it, or just twice a year, Christmas and Easter. One author writes, Sabbath is primarily and preeminently a day of worship, a day to focus on God to get a spiritual tune-up. The tragedy is that many people now just simply take the day off. They use it to take care of their mind and their body, but then they ignore the most important need, which is their spirit. Most Americans have taken Sunday and turned it from a holy day into a holiday. The problem with this is that if all you ever do is work and play, then you will start thinking that all there is to life is work and play. But there is a lot more to life than just work and play. I know there are some people who don't obey this commandment because they say that Sunday is the only time they have to spend with their families. And that seems so noble. Who can argue with that? Love of family. Well, let me just say this. First of all, if you really love your family, there is no better place to spend with your family on God's day than in God's house, worshiping God with God's people. And secondly, if Sunday is the only time you've got set aside for your family, then you need to reorder your priorities. What you are actually saying is that your family is not really a big deal any other time of the week. Beware of the barrenness of a busy life that majors in work and minors in worship. It is a proven fact that people who once a week, every week, stop and join with their community of faith live healthier, happier lives. They're more stable, they're less stressed out, fewer ailments, better relationships. If nothing less, remember this. If you really want to be healthy and safe, avoid riding in automobiles because they are responsible for 20% of all fatal accidents. Do not stay home because 17% of all accidents occur in the home. Avoid walking on streets or sidewalks because 14% of all accidents occur to pedestrians. Avoid traveling by air, rail, or water because 16% of all accidents involve these forms of transportation. Of the remaining 33%, 32% of all deaths occur in hospitals, so above all else, avoid hospitals. You will be pleased to learn that only 0.001, that's 1/1000% of all deaths occur in church services. Therefore, the safest place to be at any given point in time is in church. A poet once wrote, like a navigator needs a North Star, like a builder needs a plumb line, like a mathematician needs a square root, like a musician needs a fixed note, so we who live in a sometimes hectic and overwhelming world need a sanctuary and the one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Suggestion number 2, keep it holy. Which leads us to suggestion number 3, give it a rest. In the commandment, the phrase keep it holy literally means keep it set apart. And one of the meanings of this is that Sabbath should be a special day, unlike any other day of the week. Which leads us to the third point here. Very simply put, how often are our Sabbaths empty and meaningless because we just don't plainly live any differently than any other day? Particularly, we tend to be just as nasty and unkind and worldly as we are the rest of the week. Most especially right here in church, It shouldn't be this way. What if we were really to change the way we live on this day? Suggestion number 3, to truly celebrate Sabbath, don't just take a rest, give it a rest, right? Building upon the challenge I put before us all at the start of the new year, the challenge to be a people of praise, make Sunday, above all else, a day when you refrain from all nastiness and anger and complaining and whining and criticizing and finding fault. Make it instead a day when you praise and rejoice and forgive and celebrate and encourage. Imagine how different, in a very tangible way, our lives here, at home, out in the world would be if we did this. Preacher Chuck Swindoll, he puts it this way. He writes, true Sabbath observance results in a relaxed, easygoing Christian who is miles more attractive and effective than the rigid, uptight brother or sister who squeaks when they walk and whines when they talk. Somebody once said that there are really only 2 kinds of people in the world. People who leave happiness wherever they go, and people who leave happiness whenever they go. Which are we, and which will we be? Suggestion number 3, give it a rest. All of which leads us into final suggestion number 4, stop in the name of love. Notice how God finally makes it clear that Sabbath is not just for an individual to observe, but something that is to be given to all, to one's entire family, to one's servants, to the foreigners living in one's midst, to the animals of the field, to all creation. Final key point here, Sabbath is not simply something we are to receive, but something we are to share. Sadly, quite often the way we celebrate Sabbath negates this. That is, we often celebrate a day of rest by making somebody else work, right? I'm not gonna cook today, let's go out to dinner. I love shopping, let's head out to the store. Now this is very tricky because our lives are they're so intertwined, but the final question in truly celebrating Sabbath is this: how can I not only observe Sabbath, but offer it somehow? Offer it to creation by not using my car for a day or by turning off the lights in my house. Offer it to some worker by not going out to eat or to shop. Offer it to someone close to me by simply doing for myself what they always do for me. Give rest to somebody else. Now some will argue, but Pastor, that's pointless. It's not really going to change anything. The stores, the restaurants, the businesses are still going to be open. In fact, many of the people working may not even care about the Lord or Sabbath at all. True. But that's not the point. The point of faith in Jesus Christ is not to force compliance to our point of view, but simply to live our beliefs so that others may benefit. To offer the love of God, whatever's made of it. Each week, ask, how can I offer Sabbath today? One woman writes, Sunday was my day to sleep in. I had been raised in the church, but I didn't go anymore. I didn't see the point, and my husband didn't have any interest. But I felt my daughter Jessica needed basic religious instruction, so every Sunday morning I would get up and make her breakfast, get her dressed, and then drive her off to Sunday school. I'd still be in my pajamas when I dropped her off, and when I picked her up. This went on for a couple of years until one Sunday morning when I came down and found Jessica eating a bowl of cereal. She had made her Sunday breakfast for herself. I was pleasantly surprised, but didn't think much of it until it happened again the next week, and the next, and the next. Finally, on the 4th Sunday, I asked, Jessica, what inspired you to get up and to make your breakfast for yourself? She replied, well, a few weeks ago we learned about Sabbath in Sunday school, and it's a day of rest. I figured you never get a day of rest, so I'll do this myself to help you out. I began to choke up a bit. I drove her to church and back, but during the week ahead, what she had said had worked on me. The next Sunday when Jessica came down for breakfast, I was there all dressed up and sipping a cup of coffee. I think I'll go to church with you, I said, and her face just beamed. We headed over to church. She to Sunday school, me to Bible study. Afterwards, we went to service together, and we sat in the pew, and we held hands. On the way home, we talked about the service. This was our Sunday pattern from then on. She'd make her breakfast, I'd make mine, and we'd go to church together. Today, my daughter's all grown up and moved on, but every Sunday afternoon she calls to talk to me. It's a special time. She tells me about her church service, and I tell her about mine. You see, now I gladly go on my own, having found the Lord, thanks to the Sabbath that my daughter gave me all those years ago. A musician once said, music consists of pitch and silence, of notes and rests. There is no music in a rest, but there is the making of music in it. The rests where the making of the music of life happens. Fight for the day. Keep it holy. Give it a rest. And stop in the name of love. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Let us now prepare to celebrate the sacrament of our Lord. Would you please turn to the order for Holy Communion found on page 12 in the front of the hymn.